My healing magic was never meant for a king, until fate broke his royal engagement. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin today's emotional journey, we have a small request for you. If you enjoy powerful stories filled with love, healing, destiny, and unforgettable characters, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our newest stories. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and your support allows us to continue bringing you more dramatic and inspiring tales like this one. We truly appreciate every person who joins our community. Before we begin, share with us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. We love discovering how these stories reach people everywhere and hearing from those who are experiencing them together. Now let us begin today's story. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with a crown. Sometimes it arrives disguised as the one person you were never supposed to meet. Elena Whitmore had spent her entire life believing that healing was a quiet gift meant to ease ordinary pain, never something that belonged inside a royal palace. As a white Omega healer living in a peaceful village surrounded by rolling green hills and fragrant wildflowers, she devoted each day to caring for children with fevers, elderly neighbors with aching joints, and weary travelers who needed nothing more than a warm meal and a patient listener. She never asked for recognition because she believed kindness was strongest when it expected nothing in return. Every sunrise began with gathering fresh herbs beneath towering oak trees, preparing gentle remedies, and offering hopeful smiles to people who had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Her peaceful routine changed forever when a group of royal messengers arrived at her small healing cottage just after dawn. Their polished armor reflected the morning light, and the royal crest upon their cloaks immediately silenced the curious villagers gathering nearby. The captain stepped forward with respectful formality before presenting an elegant sealed letter bearing the unmistakable emblem of Blackwood Palace. Elena carefully opened the parchment and quietly read the message. She had been summoned by direct order of the Alpha King himself. The royal physicians had exhausted every known treatment, yet the king's mysterious condition continued to worsen. Powerful magical surges disrupted his strength without warning, leaving the greatest healers in the kingdom unable to restore balance. Elena gently folded the letter and looked toward the distant mountains where the royal palace stood beyond the horizon. She remained silent for a long moment before softly shaking her head. "My healing magic was never meant for a king," she whispered almost to herself. The village elder resting nearby smiled kindly as though he had expected those exact words. "Perhaps that is exactly why you were chosen," he replied. Elena lowered her eyes thoughtfully. She had never cared about castles, titles, or noble families. Healing required trust, not status. Still, she believed no suffering should be ignored simply because it belonged to someone powerful. Before sunset, she packed only the essentials she carried on every journey. Carefully dried herbs, crystal healing stones collected from quiet rivers, handwritten journals filled with generations of wisdom, and the silver pendant her late grandmother had once told her would always remind her that compassion was greater than fear. The carriage traveled nearly 100 miles across forests, rivers, and peaceful farmland before the magnificent towers of Blackwood Palace finally appeared against the golden evening sky. The palace was more breathtaking than any story she had ever heard, yet it also carried an unexpected feeling of heaviness, as though joy itself had quietly disappeared from its grand halls. Servants moved respectfully but without smiles, guards spoke in hushed voices, and every face seemed weighed down by worry. Elena was escorted through marble corridors until enormous carved doors slowly opened before her. Inside the royal chamber stood Sebastian Ashford, the White Alpha King whose strength had once united an entire kingdom. Tall and composed despite the exhaustion visible in his eyes, he turned toward the unfamiliar healer with calm curiosity. The restless magical energy surrounding him seemed almost alive, filling the room with invisible tension. Elena instinctively stepped forward without fear. For the first time in many months, the invisible waves of unstable power surrounding the king began to settle. The silence inside the chamber deepened as both of them noticed the impossible change. Neither spoke a single word, yet destiny had already begun rewriting the future of an entire kingdom. The arrival of Elena Whitmore at Blackwood Palace created a quiet disturbance throughout the royal court. For years, countless healers had entered those same halls hoping to restore balance to the Alpha King's unstable magic, yet each one had eventually left without answers. The palace had grown accustomed to disappointment, so when a young white Omega healer from a distant village appeared before the throne, many nobles wondered how someone with no royal background could succeed where others had failed. Elena noticed the doubtful expressions surrounding her, but she did not allow them to influence her purpose. She had not traveled nearly 100 miles to prove herself. She had come because someone needed help. Inside the royal chamber, Sebastian Ashford remained still as Elena approached. The Alpha King carried himself with the confidence expected of a ruler, but she could sense the exhaustion hidden beneath his calm expression. His magical energy was powerful, yet it moved without harmony, like a river searching for a peaceful path. Elena did not immediately begin a complex ritual like the previous healers. Instead, she asked a simple question. When did you first feel this change? Sebastian looked surprised. Most people who entered his chamber focused only on his title or his condition. They rarely asked about the person behind the crown. Years ago, he answered quietly. After I accepted responsibilities that were heavier than I expected. Elena listened carefully. She did not interrupt or offer quick solutions. She understood that healing was not only about repairing what was visible. Sometimes the heart carried burdens long before the body showed signs of struggle. As she placed her hands near the source of his unstable energy, a gentle silver light surrounded them. The room became completely silent. The royal physicians watching from a distance exchanged uncertain glances as the impossible happened again. The king's magic, which had resisted every attempt at balance, slowly became calmer in Elena's presence. Sebastian looked at her with genuine surprise. What did you do? He asked. Elena lowered her hands and smiled softly. I listened. Her answer confused him. She explained that healing magic responded not only to power, but also to understanding. The more someone fought against their own pain, the harder it became for their energy to find peace. Sebastian had spent years carrying the kingdom's worries, his royal duties, and the expectations placed upon him without allowing himself a moment of weakness. For the first time, someone had recognized the person beneath the title. However, not everyone in the palace welcomed Elena's success. His royal fiancée, Lady Victoria Ashbourne, observed the situation with growing concern. She had spent years preparing to stand beside Sebastian as queen, and the arrival of a mysterious healer threatened the future she had carefully planned. She approached Elena with a polite smile that did not hide her disappointment. A temporary connection does not change the order of this kingdom, Victoria said calmly. Elena simply bowed respectfully. I did not come here to change anyone's place. I came to help someone who needed healing. Those words reached Sebastian, who had been quietly listening nearby. He realized Elena had no desire for influence, wealth, or recognition. Unlike many people who approached him because of his crown, she saw him as a person first. Later that evening, Sebastian stood alone beside the palace balcony, looking over the kingdom below. For the first time in years, his magic felt peaceful. Yet what surprised him most was not the healing itself. It was the feeling that someone had finally understood him without expecting anything in return. And somewhere within the ancient walls of Blackwood Palace, a quiet question began to grow. If a healer who never sought the throne could bring peace to a king, what else could destiny be preparing for them? The following morning, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Palace felt different in a way no one could explain. Servants who had spent months whispering about the king's mysterious illness noticed that Sebastian Ashford walked through the marble corridors with steadier steps and clearer eyes. The invisible strain that had weighed upon him for so long seemed lighter, even if it had not disappeared completely. Elena Whitmore continued her work with the same quiet humility she had shown since arriving. She requested no luxurious chambers, accepted only simple meals, and spent every free moment in the palace gardens gathering herbs that reminded her of home. To her, healing could not exist inside walls alone. Nature had always been her greatest teacher. Sebastian found himself visiting the gardens more often than necessary. Officially, he came because Elena insisted that fresh air and peaceful surroundings helped restore balance to his magic. Secretly, He realized those quiet walks had become the only moments during his day when he truly felt like himself instead of simply being a king. One afternoon, as they followed a winding stone path lined with blooming lavender, Sebastian watched Elena stop to help a young palace servant struggling to carry two heavy baskets filled with fresh fruit. Without hesitation, she lifted one basket with a warm smile and thanked the servant for working so hard. The young woman looked surprised that someone invited into the royal residence would treat her with such kindness. After the servant hurried away, Sebastian looked at Elena with genuine curiosity. "Most people try to impress those above them," he said. "You always seem to notice those everyone else overlooks." Elena smiled gently as she brushed a lavender blossom between her fingers. "The strongest roots are often hidden beneath the ground," she replied. "If we only admire the tallest branches, we forget what keeps the tree alive." Her words remained with Sebastian long after their walk ended. During the following days, he quietly began changing his routine. Instead of spending every afternoon inside council meetings, he visited the palace kitchens to thank the cooks, greeted the royal guards by name, and stopped to listen whenever villagers came seeking help. The nobles were surprised by these changes. They had always respected Sebastian's strength, but now they saw a ruler becoming more approachable. Elena never asked him to behave differently. She simply reminded him, through her own example, that compassion could be as powerful as authority. Lady Victoria Ashbourne observed every change with increasing concern. She had expected the healer to restore the king's health before quietly returning to her village. Instead, Elena's presence seemed to be transforming the entire atmosphere of the palace. The servants smiled more often. The physicians spoke with renewed hope. Even the gardens appeared brighter as people gathered there instead of avoiding one another. Victoria maintained her graceful appearance, but privately, she questioned why someone with no noble title could influence the king so deeply. Late one evening, Sebastian returned to the healing chamber for another session. As Elena carefully guided the flow of his magic, the restless silver energy surrounding him settled almost immediately. He closed his eyes and breathed more easily than he had in years. "It feels different every time," he admitted quietly. Elena nodded. "Because you are different every time. Healing is not only about restoring strength. It is about becoming someone who no longer carries every burden alone." Sebastian opened his eyes and looked at her with quiet admiration. For the first time since ascending the throne, he realized that true healing was never simply repairing what had been broken. It was learning how to live with greater wisdom, greater kindness, and a heart that remained open even while carrying the weight of an entire kingdom. The days that followed brought a change to Blackwood Palace that even the oldest servants could feel. The halls that once carried only quiet footsteps and serious conversations began to fill with gentle laughter and peaceful voices. Elena Whitmore never intended to change the royal court. She simply continued doing what she had always done, listening, helping, and reminding people that every life held value. Yet without realizing it, her presence had started healing more than the Alpha King's magic. It was healing the distance between the crown and the people. Sebastian Ashford noticed the difference every day. The kingdom still respected him as their Alpha King, but now they also saw the compassion behind his authority. He found himself wondering how many years he had spent protecting everyone while forgetting that a ruler also needed moments of understanding and connection. However, not everyone welcomed the changes. Lady Victoria Ashbourne had been promised a future beside Sebastian for years. Their engagement represented an alliance between powerful families, a relationship carefully arranged to strengthen the kingdom's political stability. She had always believed that becoming queen would be her destiny. But now, as whispers spread throughout the palace about the healer who had brought peace to the king's magic, Victoria felt the future she had imagined slowly becoming uncertain. During a formal gathering in the royal hall, Elena was invited to attend as Sebastian's personal healer. She stood quietly among nobles wearing her simple ivory robes while surrounded by elegant gowns, expensive jewels, and people who had spent their lives measuring worth through status. Several nobles exchanged doubtful looks, unable to understand why the king trusted someone without a noble title. One of them finally stepped forward and politely questioned Sebastian's decision. "Your Majesty, we respect the healer's efforts, but surely royal matters should remain within royal circles." The room became silent. Elena lowered her gaze, prepared to accept their opinions without anger. She had faced doubt many times before. But before she could respond, Sebastian spoke. A person's value is not determined by their family name or position. His voice remained calm, but every person in the hall listened carefully. The person who stood beside me when I needed help deserves more respect than someone who only stands beside me because of a crown. The words surprised everyone, including Elena. She had never asked Sebastian to defend her. She had never wanted influence or recognition. That was exactly why his respect for her continued to grow. Later that evening, Victoria approached Elena in the palace garden. The moonlight reflected across the quiet pathways as flowers moved gently in the night breeze. "You never planned for this, did you?" Victoria asked. Elena looked at her with understanding rather than anger. "Planned for what?" "For him to notice you." Elena remained silent for a moment before answering softly. "I came here because someone needed healing. Nothing more." Victoria studied her carefully. She expected ambition, competition, or hidden intentions. Instead, she found only sincerity. That truth was harder to accept than any argument. Meanwhile, Sebastian stood alone in his study, reading reports from across the kingdom. For the first time, he noticed that the changes inspired by Elena were spreading beyond the palace. Villagers were receiving better care. Healers were being valued more. People who had once felt invisible were beginning to feel heard. He closed the report and looked toward the garden where Elena stood beneath the moonlight. He finally understood something important. The person who had entered his life to heal his magic had unknowingly awakened something much greater, the desire to become a better king. Yet destiny still had one more challenge waiting, because sometimes the hardest choice is not finding the person who changes your heart, but having the courage to choose them. The morning after the royal gathering, Blackwood Palace awakened beneath a quiet layer of uncertainty. Everyone had heard Sebastian Ashford's words, and everyone understood that the Alpha King had defended Elena Whitmore not because of her healing ability alone, but because he respected the person she truly was. Yet within the palace walls, traditions and expectations still held great influence. Sebastian's royal engagement to Lady Victoria Ashbourne had existed for years, built upon family agreements and political promises that many believed could never be changed. Elena knew this better than anyone. She had no desire to become the reason a carefully arranged future collapsed. Her heart remained focused on healing, not replacing anyone. As the days passed, Sebastian continued to spend more time with Elena, not through grand gestures, but through small moments that revealed his changing heart. He asked for her advice when making decisions about the kingdom. He listened when she spoke about the struggles of common villagers. He began to understand that leadership was not about standing above people, but about understanding what they carried. One afternoon, Sebastian invited Elena to the ancient library inside the palace, a place filled with centuries of royal records and forgotten wisdom. He showed her a collection of writings from past rulers who had searched for the meaning of true leadership. For generations, kings have searched for ways to become stronger, Sebastian said quietly. But I think many of them searched in the wrong direction. Elena looked at the old books surrounding them. "What do you believe now?" she asked. Sebastian paused before answering. "That strength is not only the ability to protect a kingdom. It is also the courage to admit when something needs to change." His honesty surprised her. She had seen many powerful people hide behind pride, but Sebastian was learning to face his own doubts with humility. Meanwhile, Lady Victoria requested a private conversation with Sebastian. She arrived wearing the elegant clothing expected of a future queen, but her expression revealed the weight of difficult emotions. "Are you planning to end our engagement?" she asked calmly. Sebastian did not answer immediately. He respected Victoria and understood the responsibilities connected to their agreement. "I never wanted to hurt you," he finally said. Victoria looked away toward the palace gardens. "I know," she replied. "That is what makes this difficult." For the first time, she realized the problem was not Elena taking something away from her. The truth was that the relationship she had built her future upon had never been based on the kind of connection Sebastian was now discovering. Later that evening, Elena found Sebastian standing near the palace balcony overlooking the kingdom. The lights of villages below reflected like tiny stars across the valley. "You look troubled," Elena said gently. Sebastian smiled faintly. I spent my entire life believing duty meant accepting every expectation placed upon me. He turned toward her. But perhaps true responsibility means having the courage to choose what is right, even when it is difficult. Elena remained quiet, knowing his decision belonged to him alone. She would never ask him to abandon a promise for her. "Whatever you choose," she said softly, "make sure it comes from honesty, not obligation." Those words stayed with Sebastian through the night. The next morning, he would face the royal council and make a decision that would change the future of Blackwood Kingdom forever. Not because destiny forced his hand, but because he finally understood the difference between carrying a crown and leading with his heart. The royal council chamber had never felt so quiet. As the morning sunlight entered through the tall windows of Blackwood Palace, every noble gathered inside understood that Sebastian Ashford was about to make a decision that would shape the future of the kingdom. For years, his engagement to Lady Victoria Ashbourne had represented stability, tradition, and the alliance between two powerful families. Ending it would not be a simple choice. It would challenge expectations that had existed for generations. Sebastian stood before the council with calm confidence, but everyone could see that this decision came from careful reflection rather than sudden emotion. He looked across the room and spoke with the steady voice of an alpha king who had finally discovered what true leadership required. "A promise made without honesty cannot create a meaningful future," he said. "Respecting tradition does not mean ignoring the truth." The room remained silent as Sebastian explained that his engagement with Victoria had been built upon duty, but a kingdom deserved leaders who understood the difference between obligation and genuine connection. He did not blame Victoria or diminish the years they had shared. Instead, he acknowledged her kindness, intelligence, and dedication while admitting that their paths were no longer moving in the same direction. Lady Victoria listened with surprising calm. Although the decision changed everything she had expected, she realized something important. She had spent years preparing to become queen, but she had forgotten to ask whether she truly wanted a life built only around a title. When the council meeting ended, Victoria found Elena in the palace garden. The two women stood among blooming flowers beneath the peaceful morning sky. "I used to think you came here to take my place," Victoria admitted softly. Elena looked at her with understanding. "I never wanted anyone's place. I only wanted to help." Victoria smiled faintly. "That is exactly why everyone trusts you." Their conversation did not erase the past, but it created something unexpected: respect. Later that day, Sebastian joined Elena near the garden fountain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed peaceful, filled with the sound of flowing water and the gentle movement of leaves. "I hope you know I never wanted you to feel responsible for my choices," Sebastian said. Elena looked at him carefully. "I know. That is why I respect your decision." Sebastian smiled. "You are the first person who never tried to influence my crown." Elena lowered her eyes. "A person's heart cannot be healed by force. It has to choose its own path." Those words reminded Sebastian why he admired her so deeply. Elena had entered his life without ambition, without demands, and without expecting anything beyond helping someone who needed her. Yet she had changed the way he viewed himself, his kingdom, and his purpose. As evening arrived, Sebastian walked through the palace halls and noticed the small changes that had taken place since Elena's arrival. Servants greeted one another more warmly. Healers were treated with greater respect. The distance between the royal family and the people had begun to disappear. He finally understood that Elena's greatest gift was never only her magic. It was the way she reminded everyone that compassion could transform even the strongest hearts. And while the kingdom prepared for a new chapter, Sebastian knew one truth with complete certainty. The person who healed his magic had also awakened the courage to build a future based on honesty, kindness, and a love chosen freely. The days after Sebastian Ashford ended his royal engagement brought a new sense of uncertainty to Blackwood Kingdom, but they also revealed something unexpected. Instead of falling into chaos, the kingdom slowly began to discover a different kind of strength. Sebastian had removed a title from one relationship, but he had gained a clearer understanding of what kind of ruler he wanted to become. He no longer measured his success only through alliances and expectations. He began measuring it through the happiness of the people he served. Elena Whitmore continued her healing work throughout the kingdom, refusing every offer that would place her above others. She traveled to small villages near the royal lands, teaching local healers how to combine magical knowledge with patience and compassion. She believed that true healing was not about creating dependence on one person. It was about helping others discover their own ability to care and support one another. Sebastian watched these changes with admiration. The more time he spent beside Elena, the more he understood that her greatest power was not the silver healing magic that had restored balance to his energy. Her greatest power was the way she inspired people to believe they mattered. One afternoon, Sebastian accompanied Elena to a small village outside the capital. The people welcomed their king with surprise because they were not used to seeing him walk among them without a large royal ceremony. Children gathered around Elena as she showed them how to care for healing plants, while older villagers shared stories about their lives and struggles. Sebastian listened carefully to every word. When they returned to the palace that evening, he remained thoughtful. "I spent years believing a king needed to appear untouchable," he admitted. Elena looked at him gently. "A king can be respected and still be human." Those simple words stayed with him. Sebastian realized that hiding every weakness had never made him stronger. It had only created distance between himself and the people who trusted him. Meanwhile, the royal court began accepting the changes taking place. Even nobles who once doubted Elena started recognizing the positive influence she brought to the kingdom. The healers who had been ignored for generations were finally receiving appreciation. Families who struggled to access magical care were beginning to find support. Slowly, Elena's vision of a kinder kingdom became reality. However, Elena herself remained uncertain about her own future. She had always believed she was only passing through the palace, someone whose purpose was to heal and then return home. She never imagined becoming connected to the royal family or standing beside an alpha king. One evening, Sebastian found her preparing herbs in the palace garden. The moonlight reflected softly on the flowers surrounding them. "Do you still believe your magic was never meant for someone like me?" he asked with a quiet smile. Elena looked surprised by the question. She remembered the words she had whispered before arriving at the palace. "I believed healing belonged wherever it was needed," she answered. Sebastian stepped closer, not as a king giving an order, but as a person sharing his feelings honestly. "Then perhaps fate did not bring you here to heal a king. Perhaps it brought you here to remind him what kind of man he wanted to become." Elena felt the weight of those words. For the first time, she wondered if her journey to Blackwood Palace had not been an ending to someone else's pain, but the beginning of a new chapter in her own life. Beneath the quiet stars above the kingdom, two hearts that had never expected to meet slowly began understanding that some connections are not created by duty or promises. They are created by trust, kindness, and the choice to walk forward together. Several weeks passed, and the warmth that had quietly spread through Blackwood Kingdom continued to grow. The healing centers Elena Whitmore had helped establish welcomed people from every corner of the realm, regardless of family name, wealth, or social standing. Children laughed freely in gardens where medicinal flowers bloomed beside fruit trees. Elderly villagers shared stories while recovering their strength, and young healers learned that the greatest gift they could offer was not extraordinary magic, but genuine compassion. Sebastian Ashford visited these places often without announcing his arrival. He preferred listening instead of being celebrated, and every journey reminded him that a kingdom flourished when its people felt seen and valued. Wherever Elena walked, hope seemed to follow. She never sought admiration, yet countless families quietly thanked her for reminding them that kindness could become a way of life rather than an occasional act. One peaceful afternoon, Sebastian invited Elena to the highest terrace overlooking the entire kingdom. Rolling forests stretched beyond the horizon, rivers reflected the golden light of the setting sun, and small villages rested peacefully beneath the distant mountains. They stood together in comfortable silence, appreciating the beauty before them. Finally, Sebastian turned toward her with calm sincerity. "When you first arrived here, you believed your journey would end once I recovered," he said. Elena smiled softly. "I believed I was only passing through." Sebastian nodded. "Instead, you helped transform this kingdom without ever asking for recognition. You reminded me that a ruler does not inspire loyalty through fear or status. A ruler inspires loyalty by caring for people." Elena lowered her eyes for a moment. "You made those choices yourself," she answered gently. I only reminded you of what already existed inside your heart. Sebastian took a slow breath before speaking again. That is exactly why I am grateful. He looked across the peaceful valley before returning his gaze to her. I do not wish to ask you to remain because I am the Alpha King. I do not wish to offer you a crown as though it were a reward. I simply wish to ask whether you would choose to continue walking beside me, helping this kingdom together, as equal partners in purpose and in life. The evening breeze carried his words gently across the terrace. Elena felt emotion rise quietly within her heart. She had imagined many possible endings to her journey, but none had included this simple and honest invitation. There was no grand ceremony, no audience, and no pressure from destiny. There was only one sincere question and the freedom to answer it. She looked at Sebastian and saw not the ruler of Blackwood Kingdom, but the man who had learned humility, compassion, and courage. I never wanted a palace, she said softly. I never dreamed of becoming someone important. Sebastian smiled warmly. You became important long before anyone gave you a title. Elena laughed gently, her eyes shining with quiet happiness. Then my answer is yes. I choose this path because I believe in the man standing beside me, not because of the throne behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the mountains, knowing that the future before them had been built not by prophecy or obligation, but by trust freely given. At that very moment, the peaceful energy surrounding Sebastian settled completely for the first time in many years. His healing was finally complete, not because powerful magic had erased every burden, but because his heart had found the peace it had been searching for all along. Years later, the story of Blackwood Kingdom was remembered not because of grand battles or powerful rulers, but because of the kindness that transformed an entire generation. The palace that had once felt distant and silent became a place where people from every corner of the kingdom felt welcomed. The gardens flourished with healing plants. The halls carried the voices of advisors and families working together, and the people no longer saw the royal family as figures separated from their lives. They saw them as leaders who truly understood them. Elena Whitmore continued to serve the kingdom with the same gentle spirit she had carried when she first arrived at the palace. Even after becoming known throughout the realm, she never allowed a title to change who she was. She still walked among villagers, listened to their concerns, and taught young healers that the most powerful magic came from compassion and understanding. Her greatest achievement was never measured by the number of people she healed. It was measured by how many people learned to care for one another because of her. Example: Sebastian Ashford also became a different kind of Alpha King. He remained strong, wise, and respected, but his greatest strength was no longer the power he carried. It was the humility he had discovered. He often reminded future leaders that a crown was not a symbol of superiority. It was a responsibility to protect the hopes and dreams of those who trusted them. Together, Elena and Sebastian created a future where wisdom and kindness stood beside tradition and strength. Their bond became a reminder that love was not about changing someone into another person. It was about helping each other become the best version of who they already were. One spring morning, Sebastian and Elena returned to the same village where her journey had begun. The small healing cottage still stood among the flowers and tall trees, unchanged except for the many memories surrounding it. Children who once needed care now grew into young healers themselves, carrying forward the lessons Elena had shared. Sebastian looked around the peaceful village with a quiet smile. "Do you remember the day you received the royal summons?" he asked. Elena laughed softly. "I remember thinking I was walking into a world where I did not belong." Sebastian looked at her with warmth. "And now?" Elena glanced toward the people smiling around them. "Now I understand that belonging is not something a place gives you. It is something created when people choose to accept one another." Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. The kingdom had once believed power came from titles, alliances, and royal bloodlines. But time had proven something different. The greatest changes came from patience, empathy, and the courage to see beyond appearances. The healer who believed her magic was never meant for a king discovered that her greatest gift was not the ability to restore energy or mend wounds. It was the ability to remind others that they were worthy of care and understanding. The Alpha King who carried the weight of a crown discovered that the strongest leaders were not those who stood alone, but those who allowed love, wisdom, and compassion to guide them. And as the years passed, the people of Blackwood Kingdom continued sharing the story of Elena and Sebastian, a story that proved destiny does not always arrive as a grand prophecy. Sometimes destiny arrives quietly, through a helping hand, a listening heart, and a choice to love someone not because of what they represent, but because of who they truly are.